Welcome to everybody to 52 Living Ideas. I'm delighted to start this new series on 12 rules by Jordan Peterson. I have my friends Claire and Roger leading the series. They are going to be co-hosts. And what we're going to do is we have actually a very ambitious format. Okay, what we're going to do is that we're going to invite people, and that means you guys, okay? Whichever rule you're interested in, whichever rule you found has really transformed your life, volunteer to be a panelist. So initially we'll start with the panelist. The panelists will talk about the core things that they got from the rules. So the aim is to put everything on the table. So it jogs people's memories, gets them ready. Then we'll take some Q&As. So not too many comments. We're just looking for questions in the beginning. So we'll do the questions. After that first kind of introductory session is going to be the main session. We're going to break up into small groups of about six to 8 people. And we are going to discuss the rule in great amount of detail for 30 minutes, okay? And then we're going to all come back into the main room. And that is really the heart of this meetup. This is going to be takeaways. Each person gets to talk about what they got from the rule, okay? So that's the structure of it. Now we record all these meetings. So feel free to change your name, use only your first name. You can keep your video on or video off, whatever you prefer, okay? Is anybody else having problems with hearing? Somebody is having problems. I think, Jeffrey, it's on your side probably. All right, so that's the plan, okay? So I'm going to now hand it over to Claire and Roger. Today's panelist is going to be Jose, so they will incorporate Jose into the discussion. After we've had some time to discuss amongst ourselves, I'll open it up to questions. You can continue to keep on asking questions in the chat, and we will take questions in this initial stage. We will take questions which elaborate on the main themes in this rule, okay? And then we'll go from there. All right, Claire and Roger, over to you.
Thanks, Shrikant.
Thank you, Shrikant. All right, so to start, yeah, go ahead. What did you want to say? All right. Well, I really, for this topic specifically, I really enjoyed that. I really like how this kind of, you can see Peterson's laying on top of his ideas of maps of meaning. So the first and the biggest one here is obviously the hierarchy, and the idea of the dominance hierarchy kind of going through and defining not just us or our species, but almost all social animals or most social animals. And that kind of defines a lot of things about our biology, our psychology, and how even just our posture and how we present ourselves to others can change everything else, because it implies a different status within that hierarchy, right? So the idea is like, if you're walking confident with your chest out, what that naturally signals is, yes, I am vulnerable. Yes, I am putting myself at risk, and I am so comfortable in doing that, which must mean that I'm capable of handling anything, any issue or any problem that would arise. And that's like one of the main takeaways I really like about this. I think it gives a real good case for the idea of hierarchy. But what did you think about that end?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think he uses the lobster as a metaphor for that. And I think, animal behavior can tell us so much about humans because we've evolved from that. But the first question I think people always have when you don't know much about Peterson is, why lobsters? Like, why are these people obsessed with lobsters? That's really weird. But it's a really beautiful metaphor to start to elaborate on that hierarchy, this kind of age-old hierarchy that has existed, for millennia. And so I guess in that question, okay, why lobsters? The first is they have really simple brain chemistry. And I think upon reading it the second time, that really hit home, so much so that like you can watch the serotonin, like it's so clear to map out the way that lobsters kind of brains and what they're doing. And they have a lot of that same chemistry that we have around serotonin and others. And then the second piece being they're really freaking old. And this is an argument that Peterson uses a lot to say that those things that exist because nature selects, those things that have existed for the longest time, we better look at, because there's a reason they're there. They've been there for a really long time, and that served us. And so he uses this very, and I think there's a reason he puts it first, just to kind of draw people into a simple animal metaphor. But you can see lobsters, on the ocean floor, and that's another key point is they live on the bottom of the ocean, like just like us, right? They're there, they're hunting for a nice house that's close to the beach, and there's a lot of like attractive people all walking around, and that kind of competition creates conflict much like it does in humans. And so I think that it's not just a random example, it's one that is important because of its kind of age.
Right. And so, Jose, do you have any opinions about Peterson's use of the lobster and kind of, because I do agree with Claire that it also becomes almost a meme, right? Of just, it's like, oh, it's lobsters, and like lobsters aren't.
Yeah, I think like the interesting, I'll probably just be repeating what Claire says, but the lobster point, it's bizarre because it's an idea to these days that became bizarre, that hierarchies are a feature of our environment and not a human construct, right? Mm-hmm. I would say that, so he tried to bring this idea, which is maybe a couple of hundreds of years ago, maybe a couple of decades, would be an idea that it's a truism. Now it's not so much. It's an idea that is challenged, and I think for some good reasons. But so he tries to bring this home by saying, like, look at this thing. Like we separated from them hundreds of millions of years ago, and they still behave in hierarchies. So that must tell us something about hierarchies, that it is a feature of our environments as much as other. I like how he compares it with the physical features of our environment, right? Like trees or fingers or bones, right? So the environment has conflict. The environment has I mean by that nature, right? Or the environment that we live in has struggle, and these things cause conflicts, I guess, right? And then we have this feature of it, which is like hierarchy. And also, not only that hierarchy, I think another part that's important, right, that he shows with the lobster, and he will talk again more, it's not only that the existence of hierarchy, but the fact that we are kind of wired to perceive these hierarchies, right? Like the importance of perceiving these hierarchies in humans or other animals. So like perceiving a hierarchy, it's something that can help you, one, to understand your environment. So am I in danger? Am I not in danger? Like how do I relate to my environment? And another interesting thing that he was talking about lobsters, and I like other animals also do similar things, right? It's escalation of conflict, right? Because animals in general, I mean, some animals obviously are more aggressive than others, but even animals, they have this like little rituals where they are aggressive, but they're not like full-blown aggressive, because it's not interesting for anyone, right? Yeah. He uses the example of the lobsters, like even the victorious lobster can then be overthrown by a lobster that did not go through a conflict and it's healthy. So that is very interesting.
That was actually something I really enjoyed. I remember reading this the first time, and I got a real kick out of it. I used to be a bouncer at a bar, and I remember seeing all 4 levels. Well, not 4. I didn't get to the 4. I never saw anyone get to the 4th one. I think, but it's like first is like the just exchange of threatening information. That's when like the drunk guys run into each other and they're like, "I'll blank, I'll do all this damage to you. You don't even know who you're messing with it." And then you start getting the like boasting, dancing of like they literally try to make themselves as big as they can and just get very close to each other. Like, and it's almost this challenge of like, don't mess with me. I will take this that far. And then you start getting to like the 5th level, which is like the
Mm-hmm.
And then the third level of like this kind of like combat, but it's only a dominance combat. It's not, you know, and then like I never saw the actual fourth level, which would be mortal combat. You're trying to just kill the other person, but like dominance combat, like I just want to show that I could kill you for you to leave me alone is essentially. But even in humans, I remember reading that and just being like, oh, we do the exact same rituals and we escalate conflict in the exact same way. And then, yeah, like the reason you don't want to do any form of mortal combat or even dominance combat is because you have the high risk of a 30-year-old gamer here, but the high risk of getting third-partied, right? Where you're in a fight and then someone else comes in and you've already used all your resources for one fight and now you're at a massive disadvantage. But yeah, I found that idea of like those that the fact that aggression is a very costly thing to invest in, right? You'd normally just want to show that you can do a lot of damage, and actually that allows you to not have to do any damage and not put yourself at risk at all if you can just demonstrate, or at least pretend to demonstrate, that you have the advantage. And oh, go ahead.
I was just saying, yeah.
Oh, yeah. So another thing I was kind of curious on, just getting your thoughts, was on how the hierarchies kind of match up with serotonin. Because for me, that's probably one of Peterson's best points for the hierarchy, is the idea that's like, especially using the lobsters, is look, we use the exact same counter to mark our status socially. And we actually have created these categories for mental illness for when people fall all the way down, right? Especially when that counter is broken, which is depression. And the idea that like, and I think he's mentioned this sometimes in other lectures where he says, there's two kinds of depression. There's like people that are genuinely at the bottom of the hierarchy. They have no home, they have no job. If they died, no one would care about them. They're like, their life is destroyed. And for him, it's like, no, that's not depression. That's your life, just like you're having the correct reaction whenever you feel depressed. That's when you should be depressed. And then there's the second one where it's like your life is actually somewhat okay or even really okay, but then you have this sensation of just everything's about to fall apart and you're worthless and you hate yourself, right? And that's actual, depression. But yeah, I just was thinking about like your general ideas or thoughts on that.
Yeah, I wrote this last time I read it. It's all about serotonin. Like that is the core message here. And I think he says it very clearly. He says, literally, when the lobster loses, they create a new brain. And I think that's the simplicity that is so interesting, that they literally, their brain is completely changed after the loss. And I think we can all resonate with the sort of identity shifting occurrence that happens when you lose, or when something happens that isn't in correspondence with your worldview, when you go into chaos, whatever it is, of your entire identity has to reshift around that loss. And often you come out with an identity that's a little lower, right? That doesn't put you as high, that puts your shoulders a little lower. And then that becomes this feedback loop of sort of self-defeating feedback loop. The piece that I didn't catch the first time is the PTSD piece also, that not only are your shoulders going to be lower, but there's this tail flick reflex that I guess lobsters have, which means that when they're like startled by something, their tails will flick quicker. So you get this kind of reactiveness, or I don't know what to say, like you become a wimp, like you become more flighty and that element. And I think it's really interesting when you cut it in terms of like serotonin is something we're all talking about because of antidepressants, right? Like something that we're actively putting into our bodies to recreate the experience that a lobster has when it wins. Like, whoa, that's crazy.
Yeah, which I think it's one of the criticisms to all this hierarchy talk, but I think it's actually why it's useful, which is when he's talking about the dominance hierarchy here, like he's like, what we're doing here is not accepting it. Like we're not talking about, oh, there is a dominance hierarchy, and on Roger's example, like if you feel down and you don't have a good place in it, that's it. Like, sorry, it's nature. Right. I think the interesting thing on understanding it, and he talks about it sometimes in the chapter, it's understanding a feature of our environment is how we live more productive and meaningful lives, right? So once you understand these features, like the dominance hierarchy, that he talks about voluntarily, like carrying the burden of life or something like to that effect, and serotonin and so on, is to make our lives better, right? And then it's also to understand that these processes involve it's a feedback process, right? So understanding this process, we can then use it to either not fall into traps, right? So he uses the example of the alcoholism, right? It's something that you have some actions that individually, these actions might not seem very problematic, but within the context of a feedback loop, they can become very problematic, right? He likes to use the example of like going to heaven or hell, right? So going to an ideally good place and going to an ideally bad place. So, and even things that might seem so small, like stand up, like with your shoulders back, might have an effect that might help you to like raise from hell, to use more or less his language, right? So that is for me one of the most interesting thing about this chapter and most of his work is to understand these things, so then we can think about them and use them appropriately in life. Because sometimes you might be in a position where things are going very well, and you might overindulge and think that nothing matters. So certain things you might just think them in short term, and you can like bring your life to a bad place. And sometimes you might be in a bad place and think that's it, right? There's nothing you can do to improve it. And so knowing these things and knowing how they work, it's a very valuable sort of notion.
Yeah, and I think it's a real important distinction that when Peterson talks about hierarchies, he's being descriptive, not prescriptive, right? He's simply looking at, it's like, okay, where did we come from? All right, this evolutionary process. All right, are there patterns in this evolutionary process? Yes. Could we assume that pattern also exists in us if it's existed in every other iteration before us? It's like, it's reasonable. It's like, all right, well, how do we structure ourselves? Well, mostly in hierarchical form. It's like, all right, well, what does that mean, and what's the rule? So like, that's what so I think it's a very important distinction that you made at the beginning of, it's like, simply because he's describing it doesn't necessarily mean he's supporting it, or that he's like, yep, this is great, people should just be, anyone who's at the bottom, just, go kill yourselves. Like, no, that's not at all the point, right?
Yeah, he does use the example, right, about technology. Like all technology, it's us trying to not get killed by nature. So
right.
So that's I mean, not all, I guess, to be
let me go
precise, but most of it, it's us not trying to get killed by nature.
Let me go ahead and read kind of his conclusion of the chapter, to kind of put his words there so we can use that as a framework. He says, so attend carefully to your posture. Quit drooping and hunching around. Speak your mind. Put your desires forward as if you had a right to them, at least the same right as others. Walk tall and gaze forthrightly ahead. Dare to be dangerous. Encourage the serotonin to flow plentifully through the neural pathways, desperate for its calming influence. People, including yourself, will start to assume that you are competent and able, or at least they will not immediately conclude the reverse. Emboldened by the positive responses you are now receiving, you will begin to be less anxious. You will then find it easier to pay attention to the subtle social clues that people exchange when they are communicating. Your conversations will flow better with fewer awkward pauses. This will make you more likely to meet people, interact with them, and impress them. Doing so will not only genuinely increase the probability that good things will happen to you, It will also make those good things feel better when they do happen. Thus strengthened and emboldened, you may choose to embrace being and work for its furtherance and improvement. Thus strengthened, you may be able to stand even during the illness of a loved one, even during the death of a parent, and allow others to find strength alongside you when they would otherwise be overwhelmed with despair. Thus emboldened, you will embark on the voyage of your life. Let your light shine, so to speak, on the heavenly hill and pursue your rightful destiny. Then the meaning of your life may be sufficient to keep the corrupting influence of moral despair at bay. Then you may be able to accept the terrible burden of the world and find joy. Look for your inspiration to the victorious lobster with its 350 million years of practical wisdom. Stand up straight with your shoulders back.
Thanks, Shrikant. I think that the tendency when we see hierarchies and when we just see the inequality of the world, and I think, he goes into kind of Pareto principle and the fact that, there's a lot of unequal distribution of everything in the world, and the kind of childhood values that we come around sharing and equality, they often don't exist. And the reaction that we often have when faced with that is to throw it all out, right? To resist it, to shirk back, to recreate it, to burn it all down. And what Peterson, I think, offers as an alternative is play the game. Know the game. Know that your peers are lobsters that can be tricked by you standing up straight and pretending like you've won a lot of battles and you have that serotonin. And that will get you pretty far to start that feedback loop sort of up again. And so it has this I was listening to RuPaul's masterclass yesterday, and he was talking about drag having this similar effect of it. The effect of it is that it's all an illusion. And when you realize that and realize how unequal it is, and you start to play the game, and it's a Christian idea, carry your cross, like know that this is burdensome, it's gonna suck. In Buddhist terms, life is full of suffering, and try to make what you can of it and make your house a little better and your family a little better and expand it out from there. And I think, the tendency, what we're really seeing and what I see with all my peers is this tendency to just want to just get rid of all of it, and that really doesn't serve you in the end.
Yeah, I definitely see this chapter and its main takeaway of stand up straight with your shoulders back as kind of almost a play on cognitive dissonance, right? With cognitive dissonance basically being whenever your actions and your beliefs don't match, your belief tends to be the thing that normally will change. So when your action of standing up straight, which is, sending out and signaling to everyone else around you, it's like, hey, I got this, we're good. It's like, even if it's kind of like, I think of it like, if you don't consider yourself a runner, okay, but you make yourself run for 2 months every day, you by definition have now become a runner, right? You embody the very thing you want to become first. And for Peterson, it actually kind of follows with his maps of meaning ideas of action comes first, right? Action is what then defines everything else. But yeah, I also really like that point on drag, because yes, that actually makes a lot of sense. And it's also just the fact that it's a virtuous positive feedback loop, right? That the more you do it, the more feedback you'll get that is positive, that reinforces and is dopaminergic, that then makes you want to do it more, which then gives you more feedback and makes you be better at being confident, at being competent, and seeking out how to make yourself better. So I really like that general idea.
Absolutely.
Jose?
Yeah, he also talks about like standing up metaphysically, which is interesting, because he's saying that sometimes, obviously standing up straight, unless you're in a very bad neighborhood, I guess, will not like get you like lots of threats, right? But he's talking about like how if you're in the bottom of the hierarchy and you just like fake till you make it, right? And you try to go to the like fight like higher battles, you might actually be a target for people preying on the weak, right? And sometimes you might need actually to do that, like that metaphysical standing up, which it's not just a physical thing, but a psychological or spiritual thing, right? Because he says we're not just the physical, we're also a soul or a psyche. So sometimes even before you actually stand up straight and actually act physically, you can do that also, like spiritually, like psychologically, in the sense of understanding the burdens of life and voluntarily understanding that you will have to make sacrifices, and that life is struggle. So it's not just a matter of like, it doesn't need to be just a matter of doing it physically, but you can also do it spiritually. You can also, I guess, there's even the expression, lift up your spirit or something, right? So that is also an interesting takeaway, because sometimes things can be so hopeless that you might think there's nothing you can do in the physical world, but you might just change things in the spiritual world per se, and improve your life.
So one of the things that we always do in our meetups is what we call syntopical reading. So that means we try to take the same, we try to take what everybody else has said about the topic and bring it to bear on this. So let me do a little bit of that. So one of the things that we've focused mostly on kind of the social dynamics of standing up straight, but I think this absolutely applies to you within yourself, regardless of anybody else. So one of the things that I learned from, for example, Tony Robbins, is that he has a very interesting exercise. Okay, he says, look, you do this, you stand up straight, you look up, and you smile. Okay, you smile. And then while holding all these three things, standing up straight, looking up, and smiling as broad as you can, try to be sad. Try to be sad without changing any of these three things. And you will find that you can't do it. As soon as you try to be sad, you automatically start slouching, automatically start looking down, and your face muscles get lax. So there is a connection, there is a two-way connection between mind and body, which is very real within a person. Forget about the social, and that it's that we are social beings. So the same process that is affecting us affects other people too, through the emotion. And so it's kind of contagious that way. So I think that's a very crucial point, that it's not just with other people, it is with yourself.
Yeah. And that, that sort of psychological point that Jose was making is important, because when you're feeling depressed, there's not much we can say here to pull it out of it. Like it's easy to say, yes, world is suffering and just get over it. But that's really, it's a difficult slump to get out of. And what Peterson really recommends is, okay, break up that difficulty. Like, what can you accomplish right now? What could you accomplish in this 5 minutes? What could you make a little bit better? And I think standing up straight is like the micro example of that, of like, okay, if you could do this, like you got just yourself just a tiny bit better, and see how that feedback loop kind of starts. So it's a great point. I'm not going to stand up and smile right now, but I'll do it later.
No, yeah, I definitely think that's very useful, because this dives a little bit into the maps of meaning aspect of it. But the idea is that that counter for serotonin, and I think someone in the comments said that serotonin, has all these other functions. It's like, yeah, that is 100% fair. But the best treatment that we have so far for treating depression tends to be things that increase your serotonin, within your own synapses. So, but one of the main things is that your serotonin also determines what frame of reference you're using for perceiving the world. So then that defines what's important to you, what actually appears valent to you, what is, and then that defines how you act in the world, which then defines every other aspect of your life. So it's kind of like it's a very basic building block of how you even interact with reality. And depending on where you're at, if you've ever been depressed, you know that the things that you think and care about and how you perceive and how you act are all extremely different than if you, in any time you would classify yourself as not depressed, right? It's a very, very different world. Literally, when I personally have experienced it, I literally noticed the color contrast dampens. Like I don't notice color nearly as much. It doesn't really stick out to me nearly as much. So just the perception of reality itself is actually modified to a slight bit. So that I find that's like really for the internal end of like how big the sense of the dominance hierarchy status matters.
So Claire, I have a question for you. When we started talking about this chapter, you said you have two big takeaways. So what are the two big takeaways for you?
Oh gosh. I think God, it's too hard to sum all this up into two things.
Okay. You can use as many as you want.
Yeah, I mean, I think that hierarchies are real, that life isn't fair, and that you can use that to serve you in the best of your ability. I think that's really a core important element here. And then the second one, I think, is also looking to things that are old to guide us. And I think that's, I was kind of wondering, like, okay, why does he start with this rule? It seems kind of random. And so many of his rules pull in other rules, but I think he starts to tell that story, that things that are old can point you somewhere. They're not going to tell you the whole story, but when it comes to mythology and any sort of historical record, and especially evolutionary biology, it's not something to be ignored.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. What I want to do, I mean, one of the things I want to do in this series is to place Jordan Peterson's thought in a larger context. So let's see what he's doing with these rules, right? He has these 12 rules. So one of the things that he does is that he has this kind of consilience approach. He pulls things from all these varied fields. So this particular chapter is pulled largely from evolutionary biology. And it's kind of, it is showing you that the evolutionary biology is giving you principles that are integratable with principles that he's going to pull out of mythology and out of psychology and out of, various other fields. Roger, go ahead.
Yeah, so I was going to say that out of everything, I reread the chapter, and my favorite takeaway was his demonstration of the feminine Beauty and the Beast archetype playing out even within the lobster mating ritual. Like you can see the exact same trope playing in the exact same interaction, where the most dominant male, the most dominant male that can climb the hierarchy naturally is also going to be the most predispositioned for aggression. So therefore, from the female perspective, to approach that, it's a form of seduction that is a taming of the wild, well, in this case, lobster, right? And for humans, the wild man, the taming of the wild man into one that is loving and caring, and then can that strength of the dominance becomes what is both usable for the woman, and also explains why there is an appeal of dominance, of being dominated by someone, because it also provides the same protection.
There is one more theme that I want to take up, because I think many people misunderstand Jordan Peterson on this point. There are people who kind of look at evolutionary biology as end all, in the sense that they don't bring in any principles that are unique to human beings. And they say there is really nothing unique to human beings, this is it. And they just remain with lobsters, okay? Peterson does not do that. So for example, when he talks about speak the truth, speak your truth, now that's a very human perspective. And it's something, but at the same time, what he's showing you is that speak your truth there is a basis in this stand up straight, which comes from evolution. It is the human way of implementing that. It is something which is critical to our volition, critical to our ability of using our prefrontal cortex, which the lobsters do not even dream of, do not even have anything, akin to that at all. So he's bringing in those points, but he's establishing points which are older, which then later on he's going to integrate with that. So I think that's a very interesting thing, that he's not denying that there are higher level things. In fact, he talks about them at length, but they are integratable with these principles from evolutionary biology.
Yeah.
Okay, Jose, what were your favorite, if you had to pick one or two of your favorite takeaways from this chapter, what would it be?
Well, for me, it's this concept of the loop. I think it's something central and very applicable that we use. Sorry, my dog is climbing on me. So it's very applicable. And he, even in the beginning, he talks about how I might get the actual wording wrong, but he talks about how the higher order, it's also not the easiest to perceive, right? So this idea of the feedback loop, it's not something very intuitive, I mean it's a very simple concept, the feedback loop. Like you can literally explain it with like 2 arrows, but the idea that we can apply this to our lives and how it relates to like dominance hierarchy and so on, it's for me like something that I use a lot in my daily life, because if you're interested in philosophy or just thinking about life in general, it's very easy to fall into some sort of like nihilism. And think that, so why does this matter, and why does this matter, and why does this matter? And then eventually you're actually going to have to figure out how to live life and how to act in the world. And then you have to look outside and see like what works, right? And how can we improve things, and even like how can we create meaning for things that can be like meaningless. So for me, that's the biggest takeaway that I take for life. It's the part that I have this rule that I take for life. Yeah.
Excellent, folks. So I think we should open it up for questions. Do any of you want to make any other kind of closing statements? Or okay, let's go ahead and open it up for questions. Folks, the pattern here is very simple. What we're doing is that we're, in this beginning session, we're trying to put all the key things about the chapter as we understand it for 4 different people on the table. We can ask maybe 1 or 2 clarificatory questions now. And then the core part is that we're going to now divide into groups of 6, where we're going to do actual kind of back and forth and great amount of discussion. And then we'll come back here. And that's where most of the action is, where each person gets to talk for 2 to 3 minutes on what they see as the takeaways. Okay, so that's the structure. Now, Jeff had a question. So Jeff, go ahead. Give me a sec so that you can unmute yourself. Give me a second. Sorry about this. Give me a second.
I can do it.
Can you do it?
Yeah, you're good. Go ahead, Jeff.
Good. Thank you, Shrikant. I didn't realize you were going to be able to get to me so quickly here. I'm kind of forming the question in my mind. The central point, really, and it is a little bit of, comparison thinking to from this to other things, and it's just impossible, certainly here living in central New York, to ignore the dominant issues of the day in consideration of virtually anything. And so what's just impossible for me to not ask relative to this subject is, to what end? Because to me personally, it just seems like there's an overwhelming difference between seeking dominance in the way that I could, seeking to be as rich as I could become, seeking to be as popular as I could become, and fame, seeking whatever other way could be commonly construed as dominance, versus, in some sense, devoting some significant part of one's life to making the world a better place and serving others. And that dramatically influences the desire for confidence, or for agency, or whatever we might be looking for here. I'll stop there, but it just seems to me that it's a really, really different conversation, whether it's me seeking dominance for me, or whether it's me looking to serve the world in the best ways that I could imagine.
Start on this one.
Go ahead. Claire, you want to?
Thank you, Jeff. You always bring such compassion to your questions. I appreciate it. So I think a couple things come up for me here. First is that dominance, in the sort of generic way that Peterson uses it, has to be sustainable to actually be dominant. So he uses this idea of like wolves, that even the winning wolf is going to turn over on its stomach and expose itself at the end of the battle. And that the true victor will, there's some story he always brings up of like, you can only win a game 20 times. And if you don't let someone else lose, everyone is going to kick you out of the game. And so there's a sustainability element here to the dominance hierarchy. And I think this is almost back to this drag thing of like accepting the illusion and winning, being at the top, but still acknowledging that the unfair hierarchy exists and letting that be a truism. And I think the way I find that this plays out in my life is that I'm actually able to be more compassionate and more empathetic and show up for the people in my life better when I'm higher on the hierarchy, or I feel better about myself, my shoulders are back, because I can do more for others, versus being lower and feeling like I'm clamoring and fighting and I can't have that effect. So I think that it's a really important point, because when we just say dominance, it's not just kill as many people as you can repeatedly forever, but do so in a way that will be the most sustainable for the longest amount of time.
I would like to add one thing. I mean, this is, Jeff, I mean, you bring up a very, very good point. See, the way I think about it is that it's all about confidence. And it's really between you and reality. That's, for a human being, that is the fundamental thing. So if you, for example, want to do good, it's important that you're confident in your ability, your desires to do good. And that is going to flow into that is going to shape whether you're going to be successful at doing that. So I personally do not think in terms of us versus them, or me versus other people. It is about my ability to, so when I'm standing up straight, both kind of physically, mentally, morally, you're saying that this is what is important to me, and this is what I am going to pursue, and this is what I'm going to do that confidently, and I'm going to do my best. And what that does is that it allows other people, because we are social beings, it allows other people to move with us. If you are not confident, you're not going to be able to get other people on board in doing whatever it is that you're trying to do. So I think this issue is much larger. I think the base is there of how actually it works at a chemical level, is at a biological level, but when you are actually implementing it in the full human context, it applies to all compassionate actions. It applies to intellectual endeavors where nobody else is involved. If you are not confident that you're going to try to actually solve a problem, you're going to have problems solving it. Next question is from Joe. Joe, go ahead. You can unmute yourself.
Hi, guys. Thank you for joining us this evening, and thank you for presenting. I am a little bit ignorant to Jordan Peterson, so forgive me if you have already covered this, and I was also a couple minutes late. But is there a certain amount of toxic masculinity in the sense that you are repressing your own emotions that ultimately does lead to depression, its own problems? And, you know, the other aspect of this is that isn't there an element of sincerity that is actually more genuine in confidence and more in how you're feeling, which is actually the most important thing, because you can get somebody behind an idea if you believe in it, but if you're insincere, then people will sense that. So is it merely standing up straight, or is it actually being more sincere?
I think this is what Jose was talking about, is the idea of in doing the metaphor. Yeah, so like in doing the metaphorical, like the the more metaphysical aspect of standing up straight, more in the sense of accepting the conditions that you're in, accepting that suffering that you do have to bear. Is also the acceptance of vulnerability, right? Is the idea of, as you stand up straight, the reason it's uncomfortable for most people, for many people, is because you're exposing your belly side, right? Like, and as animals, we really don't like putting our vital organs out there. And the reason that's, like, as you were talking about the toxic masculinity, if anything, it's kind of the way that very aggressive men show their vulnerability, but they show it to some extent as a showing of confidence, of this idea of like, I am okay with being vulnerable because of my competence and capacity. And the idea is, it's similar to yoga. So I personally, though it does to some extent fit of like fake it till you make it, I more prefer the comparison to yoga. In yoga, what the essential point is that you're trying to learn and map your body, right? And you're trying to learn the different sensations, you're trying to learn what feels like stretching and then what feels like pain. And all that is you better understanding. And a lot of people constantly report that they have emotions and feelings that come out from that experience. And it's the same thing with standing up straight, with, you know, with your shoulders back. It's the idea of exposing yourself and allowing yourself to be vulnerable, and to accept and be comfortable in that exposure, in that vulnerable state where you are walking. It's not an aggressive or combative stance. It's a vulnerable stance of, whatever comes, it may come, I'll handle it. I got it. Right. It's an embodiment of the confidence that you want to pursue. And the sincerity comes when other people see that, they treat you like that, and you start to actually believe yourself, like, well, actually, you know, maybe I was kind of pretending, but, you know, actually people seem to back me up. And I mean, just a personal anecdote was when I started giving these talks, it was like, at first I was like, this is just kind of what I think. Hopefully someone actually finds it interesting. But I've had a couple people that are like, no, look, like that's a cool idea. I hadn't thought of it that way. And like, it's that feedback loop that then allows me to feel slightly more comfortable to maybe open up a little bit more. And then, you know, I get more positive feedback, which then allows me to repeat that process. And that's kind of what Jose was also referring to with a virtuous cycle of the feedback loop.
Right. So it's going to be Wayne followed by Ellen. Folks, keep questions as short as possible, because what we're trying to do is we're just trying to cover the ground here. We're not trying to discuss everything. That we're going to do in breakout groups. And then after that, we're going to be able to come back here and each person will be able to talk about their takeaways. All right. So Wayne, go ahead.
Hey, thanks again, guys. So I'm curious more about Jordan Peterson's thoughts on like the normativity of hierarchies, like whether or not hierarchies are good or bad. Because if we assert, which I think is true, that we've evolved these hierarchies, the sensitivity to hierarchies, as some type of evolutionary advantage, that means that there's people at the top and there's people also at the bottom. That is a successful strategy for the species. Like, so we always talk about the people at the top being kind of like the normative value, but there's value in people who are losers too, people who don't win. Otherwise, you know, we would have evolved to keep winning, to keep trying, but we don't. There's something that keeps people depressed. And I'm wondering, what does Jordan Peterson say about like the virtue of that, if there's any? I don't know how to word that.
Yeah, I think as as Roger said, it's descriptive, not prescriptive. So this is not by any means the way it should be. But the fact that it has existed for 1 million years and we only have 100 sort of disregards that whole point, because we're sort of stuck with it for this 100. That being said, you know, there are many, and this is when Peterson brings in history, which he brings in lots, there's many examples throughout history of times where the hierarchy just gets way too unfair. And that's where you start to get this cycle of sometimes, yes, that's where you get sort of an anarchy cycle of something, it gets way too ordered, becomes corrupt, anarchy, order, corruption, and you kind of get this cycle. So that's not to say that hierarchies can't be disbanded, but you know, they exist. And on the sort of loser point, I think we didn't talk about stress. I think it's a really important element here. And someone brought up bonobos. Bonobos are like the best example when it comes to stress. Primate's Memoir is a great book if you want to read about that. That they followed this troop of bonobos that were like totally happy looking for food for a cup 50 years. And then they found an infinite food source, and then they suddenly started making each other miserable. Rape started developing in these things, all these hierarchies, and what you start to find is the people at the bottom of the hierarchy, they live significantly less long, they develop all sorts of health conditions, and so stress becomes this sort of unfortunate side effect. And here again, you get this feedback loop, because as we all know, if you're unhealthy, that's it. Like that is just a core element of really cutting out your kind of quality of life. And then we just have to say this quote out loud because it's so relevant. He talks about human neighborhoods when the bird flu viruses and other illnesses sweep across the planet. The poor and stressed always die first and in greater numbers. They're also much more susceptible to non-infectious diseases such as cancer, diabetes, and heart disease. When the aristocracy catches a cold, as it is said, the working class dies of pneumonia. Crazy.
Right.
Okay. Next question.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I just wanted to kind of add that one of the virtues of the people at the bottom, which obviously doesn't apply to all of them, but it's also where people that can't seem to climb the normal hierarchy tend to have the capacity to create their own. So that's where a lot of the creative people that are extremely creative but can't produce anything of value, or those are the ones that kind of break off, create a different hierarchy, and then that's actually a great innovation socially. But that, you know, that's not a guarantee, right?
Okay, the last question before we go to breakout rooms is from Ellen. Ellen, if you could keep your question short, go ahead.
Yeah, so far everything we've been talking about is really about the body. And I always try to think of humans in sort of the mind, body, spirit, you know, kind of perspective. And so is there anything you guys could to elaborate about that? Because I mean, at the end of the day, I think humans have a unique capacity. I brought my rational thought question earlier. And so, you know, kind of how we think about this more in a holistic perspective.
Absolutely. I mean, a quick answer to that is that he's got 12 rules. And what he's doing is that he's actually trying to cover a wide range of topics that have to do with human beings. This particular one is focused on the body. So if you go to, for example, rule number 8, tell the truth, or at least don't lie. Or rule number 10, be precise in your speech. That is all about reason. So what he's doing is that he's trying to cover all the issues that he sees relevant to human beings, focusing on each of the areas and kind of leveraging each of the areas that you need to master in order to demonstrate that. So this is just one of the pieces. So you're absolutely right. He certainly holds that reason is very important and core part of it. Roger or Claire, would you like to add anything?
Yeah, I guess I would just add that, you know, from his perspective, maybe not necessarily the standing up straight, but just the idea of serotonin and stress and how that shapes and changes how you literally perceive everything. So, you know, that would be a very big mind factor, right? As to what you actually even are noticing and what you're seeing around you and how it appears to you is all defined in, you know, by this phenomenon.
All right, folks. So now is the main part, which is going to be the breakout room where we'll be able to discuss this in great amount of detail. And remember that we're going to come back here in the main room and share our takeaways. Each person will get to talk for 2 to 3 minutes on what they think are the takeaways, okay? So I'm opening up the breakout rooms now.